Hi, I'm Thomas Bowles, Prince William County Agricultural Extension Agent. Welcome to our video.
I'm Nancy Berlin. I'm a natural resource specialist with Virginia Cooperative Extension, Prince William. And we're glad that you joined us today for this interesting talk by Janice Beaverson. We have Wednesday programs every day at 11 o'clock to 12 o'clock, and we would love to have you join us for the next one. Next week, I believe, is ticks, poisonous plants, and snakes. So if you'd like to join us, someone could put the registration link in the chat box for you. And so without any more pause, let me introduce Janice Beaverson. We are really glad that she's a master gardener. She has a really good handle on native plants. She graduated from the Master Gardener program in 2016, and that includes about 75 hours in the classroom and then a 50-hour internship. She's completed both, and she's been an active volunteer helping us with programming and our extension horticulture help desk regularly. So our help desk is staffed for a 3-hour window, usually Monday through Friday. And if you have any kind of plant, insect, wildlife concern, you can email mastergardener@pwcgov.org, and we will get back to you as soon as we are able. So without any more delay, Janice, please tell us about planting a foundation plant with natives.
So welcome. And I hope that by the time we're done today, everybody will have a comfortable sense of evaluating their own plantings and whether they like them or not, and how to go about deciding whether they're going to get rid of them and maybe partially, and how they're going to choose what they're going to put in. And this being 2021, of course, I'm going to start out with 2 disclaimers. The first one is that I must admit that I have a personal relationship with some, but not all of these plants. I've got a lot of them in the backyard, a lot of them in the front yard, and I have to admit I might be biased in favor of some of them. And the other thing is that I fear that this may trigger susceptible individuals into running out and spending money at our native plant nurseries. And if that's the case, I say go for it. So, we're not doing what we should. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to start a little bit with my own odyssey into this wonderful world of native plants. I moved to Bristow about 6 or 7 years ago, and once we got here, I immediately started ripping up the backyard, taking out the grass, and I put in plantings and then more plantings and then more plantings. And I would say at this point in time, I've probably got 70% of what's in my backyard is native. And all the while I drove in and out of my driveway and looked at the front of my house, which you see here on your left, and was rather embarrassed about it because it was a dead area. In the backyard, if I go out, I hear insects buzzing. I've got all kinds of reptiles and birds and hawks flying in to eat those doves that are not the brightest birds on earth. Lots of stuff happening in the front yard. In the front yard, nothing. So although I will admit, I do have an Argiope spider that gets into this yew bush. Unfortunately, I've removed her home at this point in time, but I saw her, and one year we had a katydid on the front part of the garage. But there's no insect life. There's nothing in this front yard. So I put this is in my way. I can't even see my own slides there. So on the right is what my front house and my foundation plantings look like now. You can't see them. They're really babies. But as I was doing this, I started thinking about foundation plantings and the fact that everybody has them. If you drive around, you will see very, very few homes and very few businesses that don't have plants around the base of their buildings. And I think it's because human beings really want to be in nature, and it nurtures us, and it's really a wonderful thing. And once I ripped out what I had, I realized that it's really not because the first 3 feet of our homes are all ugly. They're really not ugly. They look pretty much like the rest of our homes. So the most important thing here is that your yard is your own personal investment and contribution to our ecosystem. You can directly support the native world by what you do in your own yard. insects have been declining 9 to 11% per decade. And some people are afraid of bugs, and I understand that, but no bugs, no birds. And most people like birds. 3 billion birds have disappeared since 1970. And where have they gone? They've gone to deserts like my front yard. So we're only going to talk about natives here for foundation planning. And you ask yourself, why do we want natives? Well, for one thing, they're absolutely gorgeous. This mountain laurel and this pinkster azalea are as beautiful as any cultivar you're going to get. Most of them come from Asia, where apparently the birds and the bees and the insects just love wildly colored plants. So if you like color, here's our native Baptisia. This is my favorite one. It's blue. It also comes in white and kind of a cream yellow color. Or asters. We have lots of asters. You want an aster? We've got them in pink. We've got them in blue. We've got them in white. We've got them for the sun. We've got them for the shade. They're beautiful too. On the left here is a Spirea, which is clearly a plant that is just made for hummingbirds. You can see that they would love each other. And on the right, we have our native Viburnums, and we have several that are native, and there are about a gazillion that aren't native or are cultivars. If you plant these, you could have blooming Viburnums probably from mid-March through the early part of June. I hope everybody agrees these are absolutely gorgeous plants. Birds, which people may not be aware, baby birds can't get enough protein from seeds and berries. And it's an obligation to them. They're obliged to eat insects in order to survive and fledge and become adult birds and make more birds. I will admit that these are not my pictures. I can't get birds to stand still long enough for me to be able to get a picture, but this is why we need all those insects in the spring. And then the other things you're going to see when you start bringing in natives are things like this eastern box turtle, which absolutely adores May apples. It'll bring in the turtle if you have them. If you don't have them, it'll bring the May apples with it. You'll see skinks. This is a broad-headed skink and a tree frog. And then all those things come in because they like all those insects that you've got visiting your natives. And finally, here is a snake that comes to visit your skinks. And if you're lucky, your snake will visit you in the front holly, and you can walk out your door and say hello to Mr. Snakey right there in your face. So what is a native? If something came over on the Mayflower, even though that was a long time ago, that's not a native. Even if it came in with Erik Erikson, it is not a native. Came from across the ocean, or even if it came from a continent in the same hemisphere, it's very likely not a native. So what we're talking about here is coevolution. We all probably started from cyanobacteria, and over eons and eons, not over centuries, but over hundreds of centuries, we all evolved in parallel. So plants evolved, insects evolved to learn to eat the plants that were evolving as time went on. Birds evolved to eat the insects, and finally you get to pretty much where we are now. Again, we all know the story of the monarch. If you look at this hummingbird with this columbine, which is native, you can see that they are just absolutely made for each other. And that didn't happen by mistake. That happened over eons and eons. And I am going to tell you the story of the red crossbill that's over in the left-hand corner, because that's a story about something that's not native to us. But the crossbill, if you look at him, has that very thick beak, and he's sitting there on a lodgepole pine. And in the same way as the hummingbird and the columbine are made for each other, these two are actually enemies. The lodgepole pine over eons has evolved its scales to be closer and closer together. That's where it hides its seed so that it can make more lodgepole pines. And this crossbill evolved to have this very heavy, very wide and strong bill so that it can get in between those scales and get that seed out and eat it. And just briefly, let's talk about cultivars, because that's a pretty important topic. A cultivar is a plant variety that has been produced in cultivation by selective breeding for specific characteristics. I'm sure you know them. Those are the things that the nursery have a little apostrophe on either side of them. That indicates a cultivar. So that can change the flower structure. It can give you double foliage. It change the color of foliage from green to variegated or to a maroonish color. And they are all very, very attractive to us as gardeners. However, like a normal 3-year-old whose favorite dish is mashed potatoes, if you sneak some cream spinach in those mashed potatoes to get that little bugger to eat some vegetables, he or she will object and they won't be fooled. And the same thing actually is true of our insects. They know what the flower is supposed to look like and how to get at the nectar and how to spread the pollen. And when you start giving them double blooms, they're not sure what to do with it. In fact, I have some iris in my backyard, which are not native irises, but they're beautiful, and that's fair game. And I actually sat there and watched a bumblebee trying to get into this very fancy, fluffy petaled iris, and it gave up because it just couldn't figure out how to get into there where it wanted to be. Now, in order to know whether cultivars work or not, what it really takes is a grad student who gets to spend the summer unpaid and doing a project for a paper watching insects land on cultivars and land on the native variety. And quickly they find out that the cultivar doesn't generally draw as many insects. So I would strongly recommend, if you're interested in planting for nature, that you plant the plants that nature gave us. There is one exception, and that exception is cultivars that are dwarfs. Many of us have small backyards. We may live in townhomes. We have some small front yards, not a lot of room to work with. And it appears that in general, dwarves are acceptable to most of the insects, which just is common sense when you think about it. Because if you like inkberries, you like them when they're juveniles and they're short. You don't give up on them when they get tall and to their mature height. So that's one that I would like people to keep in mind. So where do you begin with this whole journey? And I would suggest you go out and walk around in your neighborhood and you look at some plantings that people have and figure out what you like and what you don't like. So I'm going to share a little bit of my neighborhood with you, and you'll see some different things here. This happens to be my neighbor who has a lovely assortment of different plants, a lot of perennials, not too many natives. But I will tell you that as I have gone on with natives in my garden, he's very interested in what's going on in my backyard. And he's started to plant more natives as well, as he sees that they're just as beautiful as other things you can get at the nurseries. Now, this is what many of us think of as a foundation planting. It's this boxwood hedge, and you can see it's not as light as I'd like, but there are somewhere between 6 and 8 different layers of this hedging. And this is pretty well kept up, pretty well maintained. Now, our notion of hedges for a home is buried in our brains from the times when people began to be able to be landowners, and they had manor houses, and they had gardeners, and the gardeners did hedging and labyrinths and things like that. So if you like to be outside and spend a lot of time hedging, this is a really good look to choose. Most of the natives, well, some of the natives can and will form hedge forms, but they won't be geometric in boxes like this. Now here's an example of a nice variety of things. You can see that there are different levels of shrubs, so that they, in this case, on the left side, they stay below the windows. On the right side, it looks like these people have a lower level, that they want some sunlight in, but they also want some privacy, and that works quite well for them. Here's one of my favorites that goes into every single planting in my neighborhood. And this plant not only grows sort of wildly, and you can see here, it's covered up more than half of the windows in this planting. Now, these people may be spies and they may like to hide behind those shrubs, but I'm guessing that for a lot of people, they just bought this when they moved in and they don't have any idea what to do with it. So not only is this heavenly bamboo, or Nandina as it is scientifically, not particularly heavenly because it gets in the way of everything, but it also is horrendously invasive. Birds, the ones that are lucky who can eat these red berries and poop them out and spread this everywhere, do that a lot. And these bushes outcompete our natives. In addition, these red berries contain a little bit of cyanide. It's not enough. First of all, they don't taste good. So it's not enough really to harm us if we would be foolish enough to eat them. But there are some birds that are known to die because they're sensitive to that small amount of cyanide. So if you have this one, I would strongly recommend that you consider replacing it with something else. Trees are an issue too. Everybody likes to have a tree. And when they put these in 30 years ago, they look beautiful, I'm sure, but a tree can't be sitting right next to your house. And I asked myself about this nice spruce. How does this work when they're driving their car in and out of this garage? And the answer to that, of course, is that they don't have a car in their garage. They have tricycles and bicycles and sleds and all the accoutrements of being a family and all the stuff you have to have that doesn't fit in your house. Otherwise, you would have to shave the side of this tree, and trust me, it wouldn't have this form. It wouldn't look nice. So here's another tree that you might think is too big for the property, and I would certainly agree with you there. So if you decide to use trees in your foundation planting, you want to make sure that you're planting them far enough away from the house that they won't grow into your house and that they're not going to be so big that they overpower your home. Here's a look that you might like a lot. I can't help but pointing out that there to the left of the door is some more of that heavenly bamboo that I would like them to get rid of. And there's a bit of barberry down there by the mailbox. And barberry is another thing that is very invasive, has a lot of seeds, gets spread by birds, takes areas over, and is beloved of ticks. So barberry could go its way, and I think we'd all be perfectly happy. Here's the ever popular Sentinel Hollies. Now, hollies are trees. And in this particular neighborhood, everybody has 2 hollies planted at their front door. They clearly don't know what to do with these hollies. I think most of us would agree that they're way oversized for where they're living. And making these things smaller is possible. I mean, hollies, you can hack them back. Obviously they'll grow back. And you can't really shave them because as you start shaving your hollies, you'll end up with a lot of dead space in the middle of them where there won't be enough air in there and you'll get disease, and that'll be where your hollies go. People in townhouses really have a problem with these shrubs that got put in. Here's a townhouse on the right that there's almost no window on the one side of the house that actually has windows because the hedge is just out of control. And the bicycle in the front yard there tells me that these people probably don't have the time or the desire to spend their spare time with those hollies. Now, the next few pictures I'm going to share with you are native plantings at the foundations of houses of worship. You may know Margaret Fisher, who is very active with the initiative Plant Nova Natives. And they've had a lot of successes with temples and churches and synagogues replacing their non-native foundation plantings with this sort of thing. I can't tell you exactly what all of these plants are. You'll note that it looks certainly a lot more free than that hedge that I showed you at the beginning. But this is certainly a perfectly attractive foundation planting. As is this one. I think this is probably New Jersey tea and Itea. will look really this pretty when it's in bloom, and is a perfectly lovely looking bush when it's not in bloom. Here's another example of smaller shrubs that have been put in. They'll probably get bigger, but I suspect they were properly chosen for size so that they won't engulf this porch. And here's another thing that a lot of us have. I grew up in the Midwest. This was a shock to me when I came out here and saw all these houses with entire walls, entire sides of their homes that had no windows. This is not entirely clear to me why that happens, but that's certainly what a lot of us have. Excuse me. And this is a very good excuse to plant some of the larger shrubs, because there's certainly room against that wall to have more stuff. Flowers are perfectly satisfactory and welcome as foundation plantings. Now, many of us have to deal with homeowners associations, and I would suggest that the planting on the left is wildflowers that have been grown wildly and are looking a bit messy as a meadow will look if you go out and look at a meadow. On the right, you can't see it, but there's one of those little wire fences put up along on the side of this one. It holds those plants upright. Your homeowners association is more likely to think that that's purposeful rather than just a bunch of weeds that fell there. And here's another example of that. These are asters and brown-eyed Susans, and it's perfectly lovely, and it's a great way to go with your foundation. Here's another one with nothing but natives. These are native eucharas and ferns and sedges. And on the right, you'll see an interesting plant there that's prairie smoke, which is not native. Not surprisingly, it's native to the Midwest, but it is a nice, it's a pretty plant if it's part of your planting, not if it's all of your planting. So what do you do next? Where do you go? I recommend that you make a drawing of the sides of your house that you're thinking about changing. And it doesn't need to be to scale, although you can use your plat that you undoubtedly have from when you bought your house to figure this out. So most people don't want their windows totally covered. Now, that means that you need to know how far up your windows are from where your foundation starts. That's pretty easy. You get a measuring stick and go out and measure it. You'll want to know the size of your window panes as well, because in some cases, you may have a feathery plant or something that can go up beyond that, and you're perfectly fine to have that in your window. You also need to know how much space you have to work with for the spread of the shrubs that you're considering. You don't want your shrub growing out over your sidewalk, because either you will have an unusable sidewalk, or you'll have a shrub that you have to cut back in a way that will disturb the natural shape of the beauty of its foliage. So now we're going to talk about some plants. And I wanted to say that I think builders and landscapers in many cases sell you what they have in stock, what they know, and what's easy to obtain. So yews, boxwoods, laurels, the dreaded euonymous flame bush, which is, again, spreads everywhere wildly and ruins, takes over our native areas, and nandina. And I think for many of us, it's also a failure of imagination. There's so many beautiful plants out there, and we don't have to have those structured, boxed hedges that is really what you see when you go out and look. So all of the plants that I have, there's a list attached. There's a plant list attached, which is the plants that I'm going to actually show you today. And there's also a document, it's an Excel spreadsheet, which I realize everyone won't be able to open. And so we do have a PDF of that, which you should let us know you want, and we'll send it to you. You can send a request to the help desk. So I checked everything on that chart. I can't tell you. I think there are 30 or 40 shrubs and bushes and one interesting ground cover. They were all available at one or more of our native nurseries. We have 3 native nurseries that are really accessible to us. One in Alexandria, Ursanga is in Springfield, and then there's Watermark Woods that's near Leesburg. And these plants were all available then. I can't tell you that they're available now because things sell out pretty quickly. And then I realized this morning that I didn't even put the Blaze Azalea in here, which I put into my new foundation planting, not realizing for years that that beautiful color of azalea is actually native. It's not something that is a cultivar. And I also forgot Calacanthus americana, or beauty bush, which is another gorgeous shrub, but whatever, you can't put them all in. This one, I tried to choose things that perhaps people are not as familiar with. This is Comptonia peregrina, sweet fern, and it's got this lovely foliage that very much looks like a fern, but very much is not a fern. Its height is between 2 and 5 feet, and its spread is from 4 to 8 feet. It grows in full sun to part shade. It is drought tolerant. It does have little yellow flowers from April to May, but they are insignificant, and people really plant this for its foliage, and it could be a lovely background to some of the flowering shrubs that I'm going to show you after this one. Most of you should recognize this. This is Hypericum Prolificum, or shrubby St. John's wort. There are lots of hypericums that are planted in gardens. This is the shrub. It's 1 to 5 feet tall, 1 to 4 foot spread, grows in full sun to part shade, and has these beautiful yellow blooms from June through August. So you really get a lot of blooming bang for your buck out of this particular plant. It's drought tolerant, and it also tolerates black walnut. You can make it in a hedge, and it would be a good replacement for barberry, I think. Here we have New Jersey tea, which I'm pretty sure within the last few years was the native plant of the year. This is Euonymous Americanus. It grows 2 to 3 feet tall. It can get as tall as 4 feet if it's really happy. And it spreads 3 to 5 feet. It has these really nice blooms that kind of look like snowballs that bloom white in May through July. And it can hedge. It has these really cool looking fruits. It is also drought tolerant. It's tolerant of black walnut, and flies, wasps, bees, and butterflies just love it. Now, it is said that it's called New Jersey tea because during the Revolution, the colonists dried these leaves and turned them into tea. I would have to say the fact that I've never seen New Jersey tea sold in any store or apothecary leads me to think that it probably isn't all that tasty, but was more a sign of defiance. This is steeplebush. Steeplebush is Spirea Tomentosa. It's our only native spirea. It grows 2 to 4 feet high and spreads 3 to 5 feet. It can make a hedge. It grows in full sun, full blazing sun. It likes medium soil. It has these really pretty spikes of flowers that are pink to rose and last July through September. Butterflies love it. And it is a native that will replace our invasive Asian spirea, and it tolerates deer. This is coastal dog hobble, and I think it has really cool flowers. It's Leucatho Axillaris, grows 2 to 4 feet high and spreads 3 to 5 feet, will grow in part shade. It has these whitish gray flowers in May, and it is an evergreen. If you're not growing it together as a hedge, it has a very lovely vase shape. It's purplish bronze in color, and it is really pretty in the fall and the winter. Now we have bush honeysuckle, and I can just see all of you, your eyeballs rolling back in your head when I mention honeysuckle, but this is Deervilla lonicera. It's not a genus Lonicera, like our horrendously invasive non-native honeysuckle. It's named, it's actually a species of Deervilla that was named after the fact that it looks like honeysuckle. This is 2 to 3 feet tall and spreads about 2 to 4 feet. Likes full sun to part shade. And I will just mention the obvious. Most of these things in nature grow under trees. So they are just naturally shade tolerant. This one will grow in drier soil. In June and July, it has these really pretty blooms. And it suckers fairly freely, as do many of these native shrubs. So what you do if you don't want it to naturalize, if you want it to just be a single shrub, you just cut those suckers and keep it in place. It has very nice fall color. You can see that this one on the right is just turning. It gets from red to orange and yellow, and it is lovely. You could replace your flame bushes with this. It is known to be self-sterile, and that means that you actually need 2 of them if you want it to set seed. Now this is one of my very favorite. This is witch alder, Fothergilla Gardeniae. It may or may not be native in Virginia. If you consult the Flora of Virginia as your Bible to what is and what is not native, it's mentioned there as being reported but not verified. Do with that information what you will. However, I will tell you that if your insects fly across the Potomac, they will think that this is the same native plant as they think is native in Maryland, and that's not unusual. This really is color that this bush grows to. It's just an absolutely beautiful replacement for burning bush. And this is one where you might want to, it can grow pretty big. This one that I have told you about is a dwarf, but it also, you can get larger varieties, in which case you might want to put it on the side of your house. Here's a cool one. I really like this. This is Euonymous Americanus, and it's the only native Euonymous that we have. It's called strawberry bush or bursting heart for obvious reasons. It grows in part shade. It does have these green-yellow flowers in May and June. They're not particularly flowery, but the reason you would grow this is for this amazing seed capsule that's pinkish on the top and splits open to show these beautiful red berries. And I would maintain that it's better than heavenly bamboo. You can use it as a hedge. You can replace Nandina with it. It tolerates black walnut. However, it seems that deer pretty much like its foliage. So I would think that perhaps you might be a little better off with putting it in the front of your house than the back of your house. But if you've got deer, and they're going to eat what deer eat. So now this is the first of our native viburnums that I'm going to show you. This is maple leaf viburnum, Viburnum acerifolium. Acer, of course, from maple trees, and that's, if you look at it, you'll see that the leaves look very much like maples. This is one of the shorter natives. It grows 3 to 6 feet high, has a spread of 2 to 4 feet, this one will grow in full sun and be happy. It has white blooms in June, and it has very nice fall color. Another thing I'm encouraging you, you'll notice, to replace your burning bush with. And this is also tolerant of black walnut. Now, our viburnum are amazing engines for our native bees and birds and butterflies. Between the several species of native viburnum, there are 35 native bees, 11 moths, and over 104 insects that find this to be their luncheon buffet of choice. This one here, these computers don't work for me. Ha! Almost, I'm sorry. Here we have it. This is sweet pepper bush. This is clethra, has another very interesting flower. This grows 3 to 6 feet high. but it can rarely get as tall as 8 feet if it's really, really happy and you don't cut it back at all. It spreads 4 to 6 feet. It has full sun, but it prefers part shade. It has these white, fragrant blooms in July through August. You can hedge it. You'll find it's very, very attractive to butterflies and bees. And it has interesting seed capsules in the fall. And again, if you don't want to naturalize it, if you want it to be compact, then when those suckers come up, you'll want to trim them. Now, the next one, everybody is probably familiar with Inkberry. And there's a reason that I put this one in here, even though most people are familiar with it. First of all, it's a thing that'll make hedges. And particularly some of the dwarf varieties are perhaps more attractive to our eye. The native species really can get a little bit leggy, and many people don't like that look. But the real reason that I put this one down, Ilex glabra, which grows 5 to 8 feet and spreads 5 to 8 feet, is because it's dioecious. And every time you listen to someone talk about plants and they tell you and they warn you that something is dioecious and it needs male and female plants and you have to be sure you get them, you might think, oh my God, how do I know a male plant from a female plant? The reality is all hollies are dioecious, and it actually is pretty easy to see. Now you might need to take a hand lens down there because these flowers are very dainty. They're certainly not striking. You won't be saying ooh and ah as you walk past the plant. But you can really see the difference between the male plant down there on the right lower and the female plant on the left. You'll want to buy these from reputable nurseries who know whether they're selling you males or females. You need about 1 male for every 5 to 6 females, and they have to be somewhat close together. They're not going to be reliably pollinated if the other holly is in the next yard over. And really the reason you plant these is for these berries that it makes. And the birds just love the berries on Inkberry. And again, they're not really showy berries like they are in a viburnum, which are drupes that are bigger and you really see them from a distance. These are tiny, like this little diminutive flowers, but you're planting these for the birds, this is going to be a success. This is Fisocarpus Opulifolius, 9 bark. I don't know why they call it 9 bark. I've never seen 9 different types of bark on this bush, and I always think that maybe a dog barked at it 9 times and they said, oh, we'll call it 9 bark. I don't know. Don't have the answer for you. At any rate, this is 5 to 8 feet tall. It spreads 4 to 6 feet, likes full sun or part shade. And it has these nice flowers right now. They're white or pink in May. And I have 2 of these right now. One of them is kind of white, one of them is kind of pink, but they were put in at the same time. I don't know really what tells you what the flower is going to be. They can be hedged. They have this cool encapsulated fruit that you see there on the left. And then, as I said, this interesting exfoliating bark. Every time I think I have this down, it doesn't work. Okay, now it didn't work. There, this is a vaccinium that many people are not familiar with. You know, the typical vaccinium blueberries that a lot of people plant. This is obviously in the same family. This is deerberry. Deerberry has those greenish white flowers in April and June. It's drought tolerant, and Sam Droege, who some of you may know is our local bee guru, this is on his list of best plants for native bees. It does make blueberries, but you're unlikely to get a chance to see them because they'll be eaten by the birds before you get out there to grab them, which is true about the other blueberries as well. Now here is obviously an azalea. Where did my azalea go? This is Rhododendron Arborescens, and this is a really big one. So this is a good one to put on the side of your house where there aren't any windows and just let it go wild. It can grow up to 20 feet high. It can spread as much as 20 feet. It's good in the part shade, so if your windowless wall is on the northern side of the house, this is perfect for you. It grows, as I said, in part shade. And you can think of it as a hedge. It has pretty shiny leaves, but of course we grow our azaleas for their blooms. Now, if you like a taller rhododendron that is evergreen, Rose Bay rhododendron is your plant. I don't have a picture of that, but it is a little bit shorter. It only gets up to 12 feet tall, but it does have that evergreen that a lot of people like. Now this one I threw in because it's a little bit odd, and it's a shrub that will just take enormous abuse. This is northern bayberry. Newark, Pennsylvanica, will grow 5 to 10 feet tall and will spread 5 to 10 feet. And as you can tell by this picture, this thing is growing in sand in this picture, and it is a tough plant. This plant will even be tolerant to road salt. So if you happen to have a house that's, especially on the corner, your HOA or your locality is a little bit too free with road salt, this thing can tolerate it. It's mostly dioecious, which means that mostly you need a male and a female plant, but every once in a while you don't. So I guess it's kind of like human beings. It has these very attractive berries that are attractive to birds, and they have kind of a waxy coating on them. And this is actually where bayberry candles and bayberry soap scents come from. And again, this is a toughie. This is Aronia arbutifolia, red chokecherry, for the obvious reason. It grows in full sun to part shade. It grows from 6 to 10 feet tall and will spread 3 to 6 feet. It has glossy green leaves that turn this beautiful orange-red in the fall. And hint, hint, it's another good replacement for burning bush. It has light pink blooms in April, and it has exfoliating bark that's rather interesting. Now here's another one of my favorites. This is Amorphous Fruiticosa. It grows 4 to 12 feet and 6 to 15 feet. My sister has this and I loved it, and so now I've put it on the side of my house as well. It has these really cool blooming structures that are purple, and the orange that you see with the purple is the anthers. It blooms in April through June. And it is amorphous, as the name says. It doesn't have a specific structure. And the nice thing about this is if you don't particularly like its current structure, hack it back in the fall and it'll grow up with a different structure in the spring. It's very loose and airy, and it is in the legume family. Butterflies love it. The reason it's called false indigo is that although it contains indigo, it's not enough to actually use for dye. So I'm sure that it was a real disappointment to the colonists. Here is Calacanthus floridus, Carolina allspice. It grows 6 to 10 feet tall with a 6 to 12 foot spread. Although if you care to trim it in the fall, it'll be shorter than that. It has nice golden yellow leaves in the autumn, and it has a nice fragrance, hence Carolina allspice. Both those blooms and if you pinch the leaves and smell them, they have a very nice fragrance. This is another one that suckers, so if you want to keep it in control, you just cut those suckers and you should be able to maintain it. It also has interesting seed pods, although I wasn't able to find a picture of those. And interestingly, this one will grow in full sun, but it actually gets taller in the shade than in the sun, which is not quite what you would ordinarily expect. Now we have another of our viburnums. This is Arrowwood viburnum, Viburnum dentatum, which you can see from the teeth-like edges of the leaves. This one grows 6 to 10 feet and spreads 6 to 10 feet. This is another one that I happen to have, and it's very easily kept a little bit shorter if that's what you want to do. You just trim it in the fall, and it'll come back in the spring, and it'll give you flowers again. It has black to blue drupes. And once again, the birds just love these things. You'll see them, but you better take the picture while you can, because when you come back with your camera 2 hours later, they will have been eaten. This is another one that tolerates black walnut, and is again a lunch special for bees and moths and insects. This is a cool one. This is buttonbush. Buttonbush grows in full sun, but it can also grow in part shade. It better than tolerates water. It actually will grow right in standing water at the edge of a lake or a river. It has these very interesting blooms in June and these cool fruiting heads in winter. And it really, really likes things wet. And what I would suggest is that if you're one of the many homeowners who are currently suffering from these incredible torrential rainfalls we have, where we get an inch in 15 minutes and the soil can't suck up the water, and the water's running down, and you're starting to see pooling along the edges of your foundation, this would be a good plant to put in, because it loves the water and it will just suck it right up. You won't have standing water for too long. I think I said, but I will repeat that it will spread 4 to 8 feet, so it'll take care of things for you. The next one I have here is also one that likes wet. This is Sambucus canadensis, American elderberry. And like a broken record, I will tell you again that these berries are edible. You've heard of elderberry wine, you've heard of elderberry jam. I defy you to get enough of these berries from your bush before the birds get them to make anything out of them, but you might get a taste. This grows 5 to 12 feet high. It spreads 5 to 12 feet, and it has really lovely arching branches and a beautiful form. It blooms with these white blooms from June to July, and it's very pretty in the autumn as well. And I'm pretty sure that's the last one. So if anybody has any questions that I can answer, I guess they should be in the chat box.
Very nice, Janice. There were some shrubs on there I have not seen, and you've taught me a lot about the dioecious holly flowers. Thank you so much for the preparation for this beautiful presentation. And there is a handout with a list of plants, and all you would need to do is to see more pictures, is to put the name in Google Images, and you can pull up some more pictures of it and some more specifications. We've answered a lot of questions in the chat, but we will entertain any questions that you have now. This will be posted on our YouTube channel, VCE-Prince William YouTube, and you will be emailed. I think you're already emailed the plant list.
Yes, they have the plant list and they have the plant document. The plant document lists all of these, and I think probably quite a few, maybe double as many, but on those it does say sun or shade. It gives the height, it gives the spread. If I were a cleverer person than I am, I would have been able to add the pictures to the document, but I had no clue how to do that. So again, as Nancy said, if you just put image and then the name of the plant you want to look at, you'll get a lot of images of it, and you'll know what it looks like.
Yeah. Well, anybody else? I thank you for Master Gardeners that were handling a lot of the questions in the background. I think all of us learned a lot. So
there's a couple, two more.
Are these safe to plant so the roots don't invade the foundation?
Yes, and again, if you look at the spread, most plants, the roots won't spread farther than the spread of the part that's above ground. Certainly that's the case with shrubs. So again, if you have a sidewalk that goes straight up to your front door and not from the side of your house where the garage is, you can plant something further away from the house that has a bigger spread.
There was a
Yeah.
Oh, there is one thing I did want to say though. When you go to dig out your yew hedges or your gigungus hollies, you really should consider calling Miss Utility.
Yeah.
You really want, because some of these you really have to hack at to get them out. So you want to know that you're not going to be hacking out your electricity for the next 3 days. Your neighbor will not be happy with you if you do that.
I removed my hollies, and had gotten so big they swallowed the house, and I had to have the roots ground out because I wanted to try something else. So something to consider, not letting them get that big.
Oh, exactly. Because they are trees. There are holly shrubs, but mostly what got planted 25 and 30 years ago were holly trees that you were supposed to somehow magically keep small.
Yeah.
So there are some native hollies that Ilex glabra, Ilex verticillata, and American holly, and Ilex vomitoria. So there are like 4 common hollies. Want to say some more about that?
And winterberry, I can't believe I should have added winterberry, but that's one that people see more commonly.
Yeah, it's a deciduous holly. Beautiful.
And the flowers look about the same. So when you go out there trying to figure out what sex your holly is, take your 12x magnifier or any other magnifier, and if you look at them close up, you too will be able to figure out whether they're male or female. And then you know if they're not giving you fruit, which is a big reason for planting these things, you know what you need to go and get from the nursery. And then they will be so happy.
Let's see. What's American holly? What is it? It's Ilex. I'm blanking out on it. Ilex.
Probably Americanus, but I'm not sure.
Opaca.
And that's another thing that if you have these hollies that were put in by the builders, you will see that many of them don't make berries, and many of them don't flower. They seem to be strangely sterile hollies that were chosen for foundation plantings. I guess, like the silver maple, we don't want anything too messy in our yards.
Okay, verticillata, that's supposed to say. That's the deciduous holly, but autocorrect keeps correcting it. Okay, those are all the native hollies. Any other questions?
There was a question about crepe myrtle.
Yeah.
I got it.
Oh, okay. You've got it. You got it. Okay, so you know what? Tonight, when you're thinking through this, if you are not sure, you can email mastergardener@pwcgov.org with additional questions, and this will be posted usually by the end of the week on our YouTube channel. Thank you, Christina. And please help us by filling out the evaluation that Christine Hastings is going to be sending you. And we want to improve our presentations. We want to meet. If you have ideas for other topics, that would be helpful too. So thank you so much, Janice, for all of this. Very informative and interesting. I agree.
Thank you, Janice. I guess I'll be out buying some more shrubs.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
If you're interested in lawn care, please contact our Best Lawns Coordinator, Natalie Walker, at nwalker@pwcgov.org. If you enjoyed this video, please let us know with your questions, comments, and suggestions for other classes and videos. We can be reached at mastergardener@pwcgov.org. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.